Well, let's see. Our next panel discussion is titled Achieving Data Interoperability in Multi-Vendor Environments, Testing Strategies and Considerations. As architects of tomorrow's digital landscapes, I'm sure you're no stranger to the challenge of making disparate systems work together seamlessly. This is why now we all delve into the essence of creating fluid communication between technologies from various vendors, a crucial step for scaling your ventures and enhancing product offerings. Our expert panelists will unlock the toolkit you need to navigate this complex terrain, from operating agile testing methodologies to understanding nuisances of protocol and standard alignment. So to give us more insight on this topic, please welcome this session's mediator, Barry S. Lachman, and our panelists.
So we're here today and we're going to talk a little bit about interoperability and some of the challenges. I'm Barry Lachman. I'm the CEO and president of Lachman Community Development and Consulting. By training, I'm a pediatrician, but I've done a lot of stuff in machine learning, and interoperability in healthcare is a coming challenge. And so we'll get into some of the discussion of that later. And on my left here is Chris Martin. Chris is going to introduce himself and talk a little bit about what he does and why the topic of interoperability is important to him. So go ahead.
Very good. Thank you. So my name's Chris Martin. I'm a VP of Technology for a construction company, Micon General Contractors. And we do a lot of industrial and commercial construction. And interoperability has become a thing for us because in the last few years, the construction space has seen a lot of development of point solutions to solve a specific problem. The problem with that is we all need the data to transit from system to system to system to actually be valuable and useful. But everybody's solving unique problems, which is fantastic, but no one's talking to each other. So in my world, it becomes a big matter of course, that I have to every day, how does that talk to this? How are we going to integrate this? So I do a lot of that every day.
Okay.
So I'm Krishna, and I run the Vidyatech Software LLC company out of Seattle. And I was educated in India, in Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi, and then I did my MBA from Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. And right now I'm running a software company which deals in two lines of business, but I'm going to focus on the cybersecurity line of business because that is where data interoperability is a very big deal. It's important to have the best-in-class cybersecurity software, if you will, but it's even more important that the software you have, be it from one company or multiple, it's important and critical that it talk to each other. The products don't talk even if they come from a single company. So we created a product called Dash Magic, where we say magic is in the dash, whose rise on the is data interoperability. So I'm going to use examples of technology that we've used there and how the testing strategies have been impacted by it.
So in the field that you're in, I think the two of you have already talked a little bit about why that is important. I think that in healthcare, where I've spent most of my time, the interoperability is important because it's important to health outcomes. And I'll give an example from a personal experience with my own primary care provider. So I'm talking with my primary care provider, and she says to me, I've got to discuss your colonoscopy with you. I said, why? And she says, well, my records show you haven't had yours since 2012. And I went, no, I had one 3 years ago. And what came out of the discussion after some period of time was that because I had changed provider systems, and it was within the same enterprise. So one was, I had been employed by a public hospital. That's where I'd had my colonoscopy. She was with the university that was affiliated with that public hospital. She could have seen my colonoscopy, but she had to sign out of her system and sign into the other system to see it. So even though the interoperability was there, the convenience was not there for her to do her job efficiently. And so I think that that illustrates some of the areas, which takes us into my next question. What are some of the challenges that you face in what you do?
So, so like I said, in the world of cyber mesh, for instance, we found when we were working with the company, which used to be called Symantec, it was acquired by Broadcom subsequently, we found that two pieces of software that they were selling didn't talk to each other. So, for example, they had a service desk, which was an ITSM, which is essentially IT services manager, and they had a data loss prevention software. And those two did not talk to each other. So we had to actually write custom code in order that the two talk to each other. In another case, we had to actually access the database because even though they had application programming interfaces, the darn things were limited. And so, we could not use those to integrate two pieces of software where we needed data interoperability, and so on. There was another case where APIs from the same company's products were incompatible. And the reason this happens very often in that world is because mergers and acquisitions are taking place all the time. So just because you're selling that product doesn't mean that you made it, and therefore it could have been made on a completely different paradigm compared to your own products. So, keeping track of who is doing what and what is compatible with what, that becomes a very big challenge. And it's not just that at a point in time you do data interoperability. Come the next version and all your work could be down the drain. Yes. Because they could have changed the paradigm. The second big challenge is that very often these vendors want to keep their data structures close to their chest. If you attended the session before lunch on electrical, we had a session where EVs were being talked about, and we were saying, why don't they interoperate? And the reason is that no EV guy wants to share his data structure with anybody else. Of course, there are issues of, safety and so on, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is they'll keep it close to their chest. So, those are two challenges that we faced in our world.
Chris?
Yeah. So I would like to build a little bit on what your story about the medical scenario. One of the major challenges right there is that you have data silos. Somebody owns the data in every one of those systems. Getting each one of those systems, very similar to your connectivity, data is power, data is money, data is revenue. So the moment you start giving access to that, are you losing some financial edge? And that becomes something we have to talk about. We don't want you accessing our system and putting it into a competitor's system. The downside there is you end up with data silos that you can't run a cohesive analysis on. For example, if you wanted to run data analytics and you wanted to see, in my world, in construction, we do a bid process. We have customers, and we want to see the performance of that job through our estimating, and we want to know how financially sound the job is. And at the end of the job, we want to know, did we actually make money at the end of the day, right? And you can't do that if you've got point solutions that refuse to talk to each other. So you can't pull together business intelligence. You can't go to upper leadership and say, if we made this change based on this data, we would get this outcome, because everybody's holding their data so close to their chest.
So I think that the points that each of you have raised are significant points that flow across the three areas. I'm going to add another one, and that is the problem of how much data and how useful is it. So, and having a discussion in my previous job when I was in the employed world, not a consultant, with my informatics director, he pointed out to me that we were in the insurance part of the business, that our data was a mile wide and an inch deep. So we had everything that had happened with that particular member's experience during the time they were with us, but we couldn't tell if the patient had high blood pressure what their pressure was, only they had high blood pressure. So we were lacking the detail. The detail that we had was they'd been seen at Baylor, they'd been seen at Parkland, they'd been seen at Methodist, they'd been seen by this doctor, by that specialist. That data we had. If you looked in the electronic health record at our owner system, their data was a mile deep and an inch wide. So you knew the blood pressure and every detail of the visit, what the blood pressures were, all the time they're in that system, but you had no idea what happened at Baylor or Methodist in any part of the system. So now what happens when you put that data in one place? You get big data. Big data is great, but it's also big problems if you're the person seeing that person. If I'm the provider trying to maintain my productivity, I can't go through every single visit in all of those records that I have in the big data. The way I put it is that what you've done with big data is you've created the Pacific Ocean of data. And if I'm the person trying to have an outcome, I'm looking for the pearl that's in the oyster. So the challenge then becomes how you figure out what those pearls are so that you can make the data useful for the person who's using it. So now let's transition for a minute, and we're going to talk next about the other side of the challenges. How about some success? How about some successes? So what I'm going to ask is each of you to talk a little bit about one example of a success and why that was successful.
Okay, so let me begin. I was mentioning the semantic story to you guys. What was interesting was that once we started working to integrate their own products, what started happening was that in business discussions with potential clients, they actually told them that, Vidyatech is our objection handler. What does that mean? I mean, if you need anything for us to do, just take it as a given that they will do it. And that's how the whole story emerged. And subsequently, we created the automated workflow, which actually catered not just to the needs of those particular pieces of software that needed to interoperate, but gave additional features. And finally, it's a product that works with Symantec, works with Microsoft, works with Zscaler, and so on. Trellix, it works across data loss prevention software. It works across CASBs, which are essentially cloud access security brokers. So it works around a variety of products, and that is a success story as far as we are concerned.
So one of the success stories we've had in construction is, for a long time, construction has been kind of behind the curve in technology. So by bringing us into a more modern architecture and infrastructure and being able to start mining data that traditionally has been hidden, we were able to pull out things that we found correlations. I'll use one example here in a second. We found correlations between data we were collecting and operational practices. So one of the things we found, and this was especially valuable to us during the supply chain interruption, where it was really difficult to get concrete. Getting cement from abroad, the ships weren't coming in, the supply lines were already tapped, and the stateside or Mexico side plants were completely overloaded. So that was the scenario. At the same time, we wanted to see if there was a correlation between the amount we could bill every month, bill our clients, and the amount of concrete we were getting. So we ended up doing that. We made a graph and we started watching this correlation, and we realized that there was a new KPI we needed to track, and that was, are we billing based on how many square feet of concrete we're pouring? And if we're pouring too much concrete, have we billed the necessary amount? Have we hit the amount that we should be billing every month? And that metric there kind of changed the way we operated a little bit. You could start to see, are we ahead of the bill or are we behind the bill? Are we pouring enough concrete to stay on schedule with our billing or not, between all your products?
One of the things in the stories that you've heard from all of us is, and this is true of the data. You know, I talked about the challenges with the size of the data and finding the pearl. The other another challenge, and I throw this challenge out to all of you as well, if you're designing your interoperability solutions, is the question of how you make it easy for people to do the right thing with the data. The example that I cited first, it wasn't easy for my provider to get the information in one place to allow her to do the right thing. I uniformly, early on in my career, I became interested in promoting adherence to medical care in non-adherent and marginalized populations, and I spent a year of my public health in the 1970s discussing, learning how to work with people. And I was privileged 30 years after that to attend a talk by Dr. Cass Sunstein from Harvard. Sunstein has a wonderful book called Nudge. And the book is about all the things that they've done in order to promote doing the right thing. My probable favorite of the examples that he gives are that the airport in Amsterdam had a problem in the men's room with males missing the urinal. So they put a picture of a housefly on the back of the urinal, and the problem disappeared. They made it attractive for people to do the right thing because of the competitive nature. I'm not going to miss, I'm going to hit the fly. And we do really the same thing. So one of the things we did with our asthma data to get providers to be able to prescribe the controller meds, which are kind of the state of the art for chronic asthmatics, was we put an alert in the electronic health record. And all that it did was it required the physician to click that they had seen that this was a high-risk asthmatic. We increased our prescribing of controller meds in the total population by 50%. So remarkable improvement, but we had a fault in that also. The fault is that the actual fill rates only went up by 10%. We had another provider in our system where their medical director was bug on asthma, and she beat her providers up so much about doing the controller meds, they actually went up by 40%. But so did their fill rates. So we looked into why did the fill rates increase in 40% in one place and 10% in the others. In our system, the waiting period in the pharmacies that were at Parkland was an hour or more. And so the mothers were putting the prescription in their purse and forgetting about it. Whereas at the other provider, they had a system where the prescription went to the pharmacy right away and the mother picked it up on the way out. So that system design to make it to do the right thing, it's not just the data, it's how you design the systems to make things work well.
Yeah. So I think to build on that a little bit, if we think of data as an enabler, like our last panel talked about, if the data is the enabler for the provider to prescribe something, right? It doesn't stop there. We need the data that says, okay, the outcome is this person is now prescribed a medication and they're taking their medication or they're missing their medication. So by tracking further down the pipeline, we can feed back, which is a very important part in data analysis, right? We have to feed back the outcome, and we have to continually improve that algorithm. But we have to design it in such a way that every person down the line sees a benefit for it. So like in your case, where the mother can go to the pharmacy and pick up her prescription. We saved her tons of time. We're probably modifying behavior at that point, because at that point, we're making it easier, like you said, to do the right thing. However, when you think about who's designing these systems, very rarely do we design for the human. We mostly design for our convenience or for an outcome that we're looking for, a metric that leadership has asked for, right? Whereas if we were to rethink it a little bit and think about the end user, how are they going to use this data? It would probably change the way we design it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And I think one of the things I wanted to talk about, because the topic covers it, is testing strategies for data interoperability. And I think one of the important things in doing that is to have a real diversity of use cases. Because you're dealing with multiple things, maybe identity management. And I remember recently using Lotus Notes, having to use Lotus Notes for identity management for a customer.
You're dating yourself.
Okay, you have to make sure, one, that there is no loss. You mentioned ETL. So at the stage of extraction, at the stage of transformation, and at the stage of loading, those three, there is no data loss and there's no data corruption. Not just that. Before you transform data, you need to validate from the extracted data that there are no duples, that the data is complete. You don't transform data unless you've met that test criterion. Finally, it's very important that through your journey of data, from beginning to end, that it's kept private. Very, very vital. And the second thing you need to test for is that it's secure through that entire journey, that there are no gaps in security. And typically, because data is involved, you will need to test for performance. In the morning session, we had a person talking about the fact that there was an API. They used the API, and suddenly the guy who had made the API, that vendor, said, "What are you doing? Thousands of pings every day on my API. It's not designed for that." And so performance is a very important thing to test. And our own strategy with Dash Magic specifically is that we make it work inside our lab in the environment where various sources of data are. Then we do a proof of concept in the client's environment, demonstrate that it works, and then we deploy it.
So similar to, and notice the similarities across different industries in the methodology of testing. Yeah. We've all hit very much similar things. With that, I want to ask, are there anybody in the audience who wants to ask a question, who wants to make a point? And because of the lights, I can't see you very well. So, anybody? If not, we thank you for your participation, and it was nice to have an audience. So,
Yeah.
But we had fun talking to each other, I think, also.
Yeah. It's very cool that we all have a very similar experience across multiple industries. So,
yes.
Anyway.